Okay, I hope we're recording.
I see
So.
recording up top.
Excellent. Good evening, Bill.
Hi, Sandy. How are you?
I'm fine. It has been pointed out to me that when you ask me each time how I am, I just say I'm fine, and then I don't ask you. So, Bill, how are you?
Somebody actually pointed that out to you? Wow. Um, okay. I'm good, thank you. I had a headache this morning, but I'm much better now. So
See,
moving on to the
this is
positive
why
part
I
of our day.
don't ask. Who needs to know that? Nobody needs to know that. That's boring. Anyway,
Well, I figured if I said, oh, I'm great, then it's perfunctory anyway. But go ahead. What are we discussing
yeah,
today, Sandy?
we are discussing water,
Okay.
and
This
your name
water?
has been shrunk back down again because last time, frankly, that was vulgar. So, speaking of seeing water, a conversation with Bill Wadman. Um, you and I now have been through many different kind of forms and styles of art and talking really about things that are loosely curated by me, starting off usually by a private conversation that we have throughout the week. And actually, this presentation is called Water, and it is very much about water, as we will see in a minute. But really, it should have been something else. And I managed to kind of, I think, hijack it.
Unilaterally take it over? Yes.
Yes, mainly because we're going to start with this artist, Susan Derges. And originally, we were going to be talking this evening entirely about cameraless photography because Derges really is what I would think of as a modern pioneer. So she's retro in so many ways, but so utterly and thoroughly modern, contemporary. She's British, she's alive now, um, and she's a cameraless photographer. So she really is
So
drawing.
do you know the process of how these are made?
Yes, so Derja spends a lot of time in the West Country here in England, and she works very much in tune with nature. And for these kinds of images, the Eden series and many others like it, she often takes light sensitive paper, photosensitive papers out at night. There's actually a lovely description by Derges that the the night landscape is her dark room, and what she does is she submerges large sheets of photosensitive paper into rivers and pools, and she allows them to expose naturally by using some kind of false light sometimes to pick up these amazing patterns that are created within the water. She then,
So this is just water flow and say rain dropping on the surface?
yeah, so yeah, it it's like a photogram, isn't it? It's a sun.
Sure.
If we were going to talk about someone like Anna Atkins, we could tie it back in with this idea again of like pioneering and process-driven photography from the 19th century. But here she is on, the kind of wilds and rapids and Dartmoor and other places in the West Country, making these extraordinary and often very large images that are really about collapsing that distance between an artist and their material and then the material in the world. There's no kind of middleman here. We just have Derges and the light, or Derges and nature.
Yeah. Although, I mean, it seems like there is a fair amount of work going on in the printing process to bring it all out, I bet.
Well, I think there's so much to be said about the interference patterns that we can see anyway. You know,
Yeah.
just to have nature do its thing on a surface. You know, how extraordinary is that? That it should be such an everyday, totally ordinary occurrence for water to move, drops to fall, clouds to whiz past in the sky. I don't know, as much as this is a still image, there's also obviously elements of it feeling as if it's alive and it's moving. Um, Quality of what we see in the image and also the quality of the color is kind of approaching the sublime, and thinking again also about the title today. Yes, water thematically links the images, but I could also so easily have called this presentation today sublime or approaching the sublime.
Do you think that, like, the way that this is composed here, do you think it's a crop of a larger piece of film? Just the angles at which, this strip of drips kind of goes across it is almost too correct. You know what I mean? From a ratio point of view and all the rest of it. Do you think that that's just happenstance, or do you think that that was a decision made after the fact?
No, I think this is like I said. I don't think we're being manipulated.
Okay.
I don't
Yep.
think Susan Derges needs to do anything other than be Susan Derges.
I think you need to. Have you had her on your show?
Oh,
Well, you could probably make that happen.
I'd love it. Are you kidding? I can't even get into bloody Clubhouse. Um, well,
You will once I, give them all of my contact information for everyone I've ever met. But yeah,
but anyway, I think again this idea of having a photographer who
yeah,
is unashamedly working with the actual thing. There's in so many ways cameraless photography. You might say, well, it's not very process driven, it's not very technical because there's no camera intermediary. But of course, we know this is process driven. The process in itself, though, is so almost elemental. And
yeah.
to record nature in this way, I don't know, is profoundly truthful.
The work like this is really interesting to me because I very much appreciate the final result. I appreciate the final result more because of the process of getting there. But if you showed this to me, I don't know that I would know how she got there without 2 or 3 paragraphs of description next to it. You know what I mean?
Mm, well, this again maybe is where you and I are slightly different. We talked, and I wish we'd recorded it actually just before we did start recording, about I know all the photographers who are in this presentation and that I have studied them up to a point, but I haven't laden myself down with lots of contextual information, which is obviously what I would normally do. I
Sure.
normally do quite a lot of research, especially when I'm planning lessons. Um, but with Susan Derges, I'm aware of her. I'm aware of her work. I know what she does, and likewise with Roni Horn coming up and Hiroshi Sugimoto. But I don't deeply understand from their perspective what they're doing. And anyway, what I was saying is that before you and I came on to record, we were saying that maybe we better be careful that we don't say something that sounds silly or that's actually just outright wrong. And I really have been thinking about this a lot. As you know, somebody criticized me in another film I made because I got some facts wrong, and I actually did get facts wrong, and I apologize for that. But really, I think what's so important is that anybody looking has free space to say what they see.
Sure.
And so you and I, although it's lovely to be able to credit Susan Derges with this beautiful photograph, nonetheless, I can also credit Bill Wadman and Sandy Robertson for looking at this beautiful photograph and recognizing it as something that we enjoy or something that resonates with us or has some kind of meaning. And I think that's deeply personal. And in that vein, I also think that when we then look at a name and we look at a title and we look at a date at which something has been made, yes, it enhances how clever we can sound when we're relaying information. And yes, it can support us when we respectfully want to understand and appreciate what another photographer has done or is doing. But at the same time, we can meet this fresh each time we see it. And I think, I don't know for sure, but I would go out on a limb and I would say that knowing what little I do know about Susan Derges and her process, I actually think she would quite appreciate the sense that we're not putting too much of a middleman between us and her photograph, in that
Hmm.
actually she even becomes maybe not absent, but I spoke to Matteo Pericoli the other day about his drawing, and I was talking to him about how generous I always find his drawings, how much he's giving. And I feel this with Derges is that there's a generosity of giving us something that we know is all around us in nature. But there's also a generosity to share it in a way that we don't always see with our actual eye. There's a generosity of doing something that not everybody has the opportunity to do, and then delivering it to us in a way that we can consume or observe or participate in through our own matrix of understanding and emotion and psychology and experience and so on.
So you see this art very altruistically.
Yes.
Do you think that that's actually the true, or do you think that that is just the way you prefer to perceive it?
My point is that it's okay for me to prefer to perceive it.
Fair enough. Yeah. Would you feel differently about this? See, the more I stare at this photograph, the more I like it.
Oh,
But
Billy, go and see some. Honestly, try and ever see some. I don't know. I don't know if any of her work is in MoMA or the Met or anywhere that you could go see it, because actually to see the actual
how big are the prints?
print, they're often big, pretty big.
Okay.
Um,
I guess my question is, if I told you right now that, I talked to Susan and she's been lying this whole time, this is actually just a digital composite of water drops and clouds, would you feel differently about the final result?
mm,
You have to think about that one.
but again, it's okay to spend some time thinking about that
Sure.
question.
Yeah.
I think in one way, no, because again, I'm engaging with this visually to do with my experience of seeing, and it's good for me to look at work that I know I recognize, but where I don't know it that well. I don't know the backstory. And again, we've touched on this in other conversations we've had. But I think if I knew a full story of like a digital process that had happened, I would probably still think this is extraordinarily beautiful.
Yeah.
I don't think that is in any way diminished by the way it's been reached. Yes, there's an element of the beauty being enhanced. And again, this idea of the sublime, this extraordinary sense that we are
I
kind
mean,
of
there's
one with nature here. But
in some ways there's like an ultimate analogness to the way that this has been made. I mean, other than probably the printing process at the end, right? And I don't mean that like in a analog digital. I'm just saying that it's a very um, um, when I mean analog, I just mean sort of infinite in possibility in the way that it's made.
I've actually just written that down. I love that ultimate analogness.
It's not quantized, for lack of a better word. Um, I, and I think that there's something about the idea that there's this photosensitive piece of film or paper or however she does her work, you know, sitting in there, nature's banging on it for however long. She goes and she processes it, and then it becomes this big thing on the wall. Maybe there's some digital stuff in there, but regardless,
So,
the idea. Go ahead.
well, no, I mean, she's putting the paper direct into the water, and then
That's
after
what I'm saying.
she's taking it back to. I mean, she's calling the night sky her dark room, but she
Yeah.
is taking it back and then developing.
No, I understand. Yeah, yeah. But at a certain point, but it is all. There's a lot left to chance. You know what I mean? She's not dripping those drips in that particular spot. Maybe she's made. She can't see what it sees. She can't stick her head where that piece of paper is underneath the water. She can't. There's a lot to it that is purposefully left to reality to decide.
Well, we could come up with a really, big question here about photography in general, couldn't we?
Go
Is
ahead.
how much does a photographer ever really create the image?
Sure.
You know,
I mean,
I mean, I photograph interiors, as you know, I photograph interior architecture. It's what I think is beautiful. But have I made that building? No.
No.
Am I reliant on someone else creating something first in order for me to borrow it and hijack it for my own photographs? Yes.
Yeah. I
Um,
think there's very little 100. I mean, photography is, but I mean, the same thing is true of painting. Monet did not build the water lilies. He just painted them. So, I mean, that's art in general, right? It's always referencing some sort of reality, usually.
yeah. But in terms of thinking of this as a thing that someone has crafted, um, there's as much and as little craft in this as maybe in any photograph.
Sure. In fact, I think that it's always interesting because I am a very technical technically inclined photographer. If I had a conversation with Susan, it would not be about the artistry, it would be about her technical process because that's something she can describe. She can't really describe in words. It's a little bit like writing about music is like dancing about architecture kind of thing, right? It's just like she can't use words to describe what it is that she's doing. I
Mm.
could watch her do it, but ultimately, if I asked her, how long are you leaving these things out for? Are you doing anything in the development process to bring up the contrast? Like those are things that she could give me definitive answers to. The rest of it, I don't know that there's definitive answers to any of it.
Well,
Why
Bill,
do you care about definitive answers, Bill? That's what you're about to say.
I'm looking at something though that we could pick it apart. We could analyze it in a way that is like a kind of paralysis of
Well,
analyze.
no, hold on a second. There's something that you and I have a difference of opinion here. You see analysis or say me wanting to technically understand how this was made as somehow deconstructing it in a negative way versus trying to understand it to appreciate it more, which is the way that I come at it.
Oh, I don't think I see it as a negative thing, but what I find when you and I talk about things is
Yeah.
that you want to close it down. You want to pinpoint right into the center of something,
Yes.
not because the center is the point of the entirety of the universe, but because it almost, to me, sometimes it can seem as if it therefore closes the availability of potential.
Interesting. Yeah, I want to find the fault line to put a chisel so I can go clink and the finger cracks in half and you go, okay, now I can understand where that line is and why it divides that way.
So
I'm very much like that. That's true.
that's making something finite, or that's approaching something to finish it.
Yes, where you like to leave the book. You don't want to read the last page of the story when I want to go to the next book. I mean, that's just a fundamental difference in the way that we see the world, I think.
Well, it's also why I think we're able to talk about photographs, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah. Well,
I'm
it's why these conversations are more interesting than if it was two people who agree on the way they see the world.
but I do want to extract from you. I mean, I've done an awful lot of talking today. I apologize for that. I want you to say, please, what do you see when you look at this? How do you feel when you look at this? What do you take away when you imagine moving away from this?
It's funny. When I if I stare at this, it's a thing that I had when I used to be more involved in music and production and that kind of stuff, where I have a very difficult time, especially with things that are photographic, because I generally understand photographic stuff. I have a very hard time turning off my brain and not instantly thinking, how did she do that? And how would I do that? You know what I mean? Like I instantly see you're laughing and you're making jokes, but do you see? You mean you can imagine that that's how my brain works, right? So I look at this and I see, I know, see, you're completely laughing at me right now. I see, I see two very distinct layers, right? I see what feels like a cloud pattern and I see what feels like raindrop interference stuff on top. The fact that those are actually sort of one layer because it's just the water in motion and it's not actually, say, clouds through the water or something like that. Oh, it could be. That's actually probably pretty likely. Um, I see it as two distinct layers. I do not see it as one piece. The more I look at it, the more it blends together. But my initial representation of it is very um, it feels like layers of acetate on top of each other.
Mm.
You know, um, almost as if you could make this by taking two photographs and overlaying them. You know, doing that kind of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But that doesn't take away from it. It's just interesting to me to try to suss out. That's like the puzzle that I play in my brain.
Mm.
Um,
I do think a lot of people would automatically assume this was some kind of double exposure.
yeah, yeah. It certainly looks like it, but there's also this weird thing, and I am not in any way a religious person, so I'm putting that out there right now. I'm like as atheists can get, but there's some very the way that it seems like the what if this was a daytime photograph would be the sun blasting through the clouds there, like the third in from the left, like this big strip is very sort of Baroque art of clouds and like God's light coming through.
Yeah.
That kind of feeling in a painting. I mean, the back, if you take the drops away from the front, it really does feel like the basis for a Baroque painting of a bunch of cherubic angels flying through.
But is that
Um,
also not something that we're drawn into in this as a kind of narrative quality that much as we may not be religious, but that we are hugely um, respectful in the presence of the greatness of nature, for example.
Totally, but I actually see it even more so as uh, is there something about uh, the abstractness of it that actually ultimately what attracts me. Someone behind me, yeah. Um, it's the abstractness is what really kind of makes me feel. I prefer to look at it abstractly versus looking at it as a literal place and time. You know what I mean? I feel like it's more successful as an abstraction.
Hmm.
You like the way it looks. See, this one is very literal of how it looks.
I don't know if you know this one, Bill.
I don't know.
Okay, so just to make it really clear for you and for others looking, if you're not familiar with Roni Horn's photographs, down at the bottom, you can only just see it. Um, there are footnotes, and on the surface of that photograph, these footnotes are each linked to a little number that is somewhere on the surface of that water in the print.
Oh, super small.
It's teeny tiny, and actually, even when you go into the gallery, this is a very large photograph again. The footnotes, you really have to get up. Certainly, me, poor eyesight, have to get up really close to read what they say. And so, this is just one of many photographs taken. Series Still Water, the River Thames, for example, is the actual title.
Yeah.
Um, and in the series, there are always these little numbers, and then the numbers are down at the bottom, like kind of like a key.
And
And
what do they say?
well, it could say all kinds of things. There's all sorts of information about like a moment that's happened or something that's occurred. It could be something as simple like, plastic bag, or
Okay.
it could be memory of Bill, or it's so many
Yeah.
different things. Again, this is such a movement.
Toes the line between visual art and poetry.
Yes, and also between process and concept, and whether those two things are separate at all, or if
Yeah.
they're part of the same kind of discourse. And when we look at a photograph like this, perhaps there isn't the same quality of sublime beauty that we may perceive or think we see in this. And yet, still, there's this sense of something much bigger than myself in this photograph. Mm.
Do you, do you think that it is fair to judge or think about or look at this photograph out of context of those footnotes? Or do you think that it's only what it is with the footnotes?
I think it's what it is with the footnotes, but I don't think we have to know or see or read the footnotes in order to understand the photograph.
Oh, really? Okay.
So the fact
So
that
then what's
there are footnotes, the fact that there is a key to somehow understand or read this image, this is in so many ways, is this not the antithesis of what we're just talking about with Susan Derges, where Roni Horn is very exacting, uh, and much as we're looking at this quite literally a fluid form, something that's changing through every moment, nonetheless, she is closing it down for us.
yeah.
She is making something so incredibly laden with meaning that she
Yeah.
projects into it that we,
She's making decisions and then telling us what those decisions she made are.
well, maybe. And because of that, I'm at once really, really thrilled by this, and I do want to know. I want to read. I want to get right up close to that glass, practically, so the curator at the Tate comes over and pulls you away, so I can
Yeah.
see every single little thing. I want to understand it. But then when I
Yeah.
stand back and simply look at the photograph, I wonder how much I care about this photograph.
Well, I guess that would be my question, is that if you saw this photograph out of context without the stuff, without it being on the wall of the Tate, would you flip by it?
I don't know if you do this, like when you're in MoMA and you're walking around, there's an element of just being completely contrary. And the
Sure.
ugliest, most boring thing is the thing that you want to go and look at the most.
Okay.
I
I can
want
see that.
to look at that. I've perhaps observed people doing that, being that. Sometimes I'm that in a gallery.
I especially when it comes to modern art, contemporary art, when it comes to work like this that involves a fair amount of interpretation. Um, and I go somewhere to the Whitney or to this. This feels more Whitney than MoMA to me, but you go to a museum and you're standing there and you think, okay, I am not a complete art luddite. I know enough to understand what's going on here, but you also constantly are wondering whether you're being taken and it's a Emperor's New Clothes and you're not in on the joke. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
But I wonder if also there's an element of kindness and again the sense of generosity with Horn with this.
Sure.
She's
No, and I'm not saying that I don't that I dislike this. I'm just wondering. Sometimes I think that there's times when I'll look at work and I go, I think this is good. Do I think this is good because
mm,
it's here and I'm being told it's good because it's at the Whitney? Or would I actually think this was good if I came upon it sitting in a trash bin outside? You know, and I have a hard time with that. And it could be my own sophistication. I don't know.
but are we not totally crippled by our kind of self-consciousness in these settings anyway?
Sure, absolutely.
You know,
And yeah, go ahead.
no, I mean, I teach 11 to kind of 18-year-olds,
Yeah,
and you could write a thesis on their changing relationship with their own self-consciousness over that art
sure.
of their adolescence. And in year 7, when they come in and they're 11, they are so unself-conscious. You can show them anything, and they'll, not always, but mostly, and most of them will respond genuinely. And often it is the opposite to what we would think of as the sophisticated reading or analysis of anything. But
Right.
actually, it's often the most insightful reading.
Sure. Yeah,
What
because they don't have any of that cruft on top. that they're seeing. They don't have all the lenses that we're seeing things through for having had 40 years of staring at stuff like this.
Yeah, but also, maybe as you go through that kind of period of training, being trained up to be an artist, there's an element of the absurd in that,
Sure. Yeah.
uh, that we have to kind of
I
learn our sophistication.
I had a really interesting conversation once. I ended up going to music school for college, but for the first 2 years, I was in engineering school at the University of Connecticut. And a friend of my sister's, who my sister was a anthropology and archaeology kind of person, and I was at a party one night with talking to a friend of hers, this guy Tim, and it was when I was trying to decide whether or not I wanted to go to school for music. And he said, I said, the thing that I'm worried about is that I really love music.
Hmm.
I love it like I love, watching a magician perform art or, perform magic.
Mm.
And I'm worried that if I know too much about how the magic is done, that I'm not going to be able to appreciate the magic anymore. And I said, I'm honestly worried about that. And he said, the way you have to think about it is that once you know how the magic is done, then you understand the magic in watching other people enjoy that magic. And that's its own kind of great thing. And it's like I've always thought about this conversation, and I think it comes to do with art in the same way that your students are sometimes coming with this sort of really uh, uh, blank slate kind of mind, which can give insights into things. There's of course also value into understanding structure and composition and history of art and all the rest of it and how things interconnect and whatever. That also has its own, it both has its own power but its own weight, you
Mm.
know and it's it's fascinating. So anyway, just it's yeah, I've never seen this image. I would like to, I'll have to get a big version of it so I can read some of the notes at the bottom.
Yeah, I think it's like I said, I would spend a long time reading the notes. But there's also something, Roni Horn is a conceptual artist, so actually she'll be wise to all of this stuff that we're talking about now. When you go into a gallery, and again, this is about maybe observing other kind of gallery behaviors. Again, I'm sure there will be students writing their dissertations on this as we speak, gallery behavior. But there are lots of people, again, perhaps in that sort of a bid to be respectful, a bid to be smart, perhaps wanting to appear to be invested in what they've sometimes paid maybe quite a lot of money to go and see. But watching people reading and digesting the accompanying text, or frantically pushing the buttons or listening on their audio guides about every single thing they see.
Sure.
And I'm sure that there'll be some element somewhere of Roni Horn understanding the nature of that behavior, and there being an element of like a mirthfulness in knowing that some pseudo art buff like me is going to spend absolutely hours reading every single little
Yeah.
footnote and trying to pair it all up with the numbers.
This
And
whole thing could be a big inside joke in some ways.
it is, but again, I come back to this notion of kindness and generosity. I don't think that's an unkindness that she's doing that, if that is what she has done. But there's also just a really interesting element of looking at any work of art where perhaps one isn't quite sure what's going on or what is intentioned, and that incredible, that kind of death-like feeling of worry that you've somehow made some kind of slip or faux pas, and that other people might think you're stupid or
Sure.
not meant to be there. So there I am, reading everything, looking. But in terms of it being about water as a presentation, it did come immediately to mind that we should look at these. Like I said, there's many in a series, and each of them is very different. And it made me think, just generally about photographing any part of like the ocean, anywhere where there's water, how each time the the image is made, even a fraction of a second, water changes immediately, doesn't it? It's
Yeah, I
never.
mean, it is basically chaos and fractal. It's, I mean, it's yeah, you would never get the same picture. And you also can't control it, which is also interesting.
And yet,
Well, I mean, I've loved this picture since I saw it. In fact, we discussed this on taking pictures a million years ago.
particular one.
Yeah, I think it is because you look at work like this and you think to yourself, well, first of all, I hope that these I've never seen it in print, but I hope that it's big. Like that big. See, I would have imagined bigger, but you look at something like this, and this is the use of photography as a. This didn't need to be photography. You know what I mean? You could make this in a number of different visual art forms and get a very similar product. Does that make sense?
Oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to kind of withstand you using the word product with this photograph.
I don't mean product as in something to sell. I mean product as in, the final state of the work. I'm saying you could paint something that at first glance it could be a painting or it could be a photographic print, because ultimately it's kind of a gradient, but that's kind of what's amazing and lovely about it.
It is amazing and lovely, isn't it? This
Yeah, it feels like you want to just jump in, like into it, take a nap.
is Sugimoto this photograph?
Is he? Is this photograph?
Is he this photograph? Is Susan Derges this photograph? Is Roni Horn this photograph? I
Do you
would.
think any of them would say yes?
I wonder if Sugimoto is this photograph.
Let me ask you. I mean, you love almost every single one of these that we've done. You've put a Japanese artist in.
I think
You love the Japanese art aesthetic.
I do, and actually, I have to
Uh,
say that Susan Derges lived in Japan for many years.
Yeah,
And
I could see that.
yeah, she brought, I think, back that kind of whatever the sensibility is that.
Yeah, I could never put it into words, but it is there.
Mm,
Let me ask you a question just before we move on to this one too deeply. If you go see a bunch of art and there's something that you're thinking about, if you're thinking about a piece of art after the fact, like when you left the next day, the night, does that add to its mystique, add to its importance to you? Is that a successful thing or is that an unsuccessful thing for you?
you mean if the piece sticks in my mind beyond having seen it?
Yeah. And it's trying to make you, I don't know, refine your interpretation of it. You're it's stuck in your big toe, as it were. You know what I mean? It's like a thorn you're trying to apply. You're like, what is it about that thing that I liked or didn't like, or like, why does that affect me? Does that give it points in your brain?
Well, I think with this particular image, this
Yeah,
image, this image does stay with me. Uh,
yeah, and has since you first saw it.
yeah, it's always stayed with me. But I would say actually all of them do. I don't choose to revisit them, maybe in the way you're asking about, but I certainly know that there's a resonance, especially with an image like this, where for me, as usual, it's going to be about kind of the quietness and the the meeting of nothing, the void.
Sure.
See,
I this is a one of the best examples of sort of nothingness that I've ever seen.
and yet, of course, we register it as water. And
Yeah.
Freud always said water, the ocean is your subconscious, isn't it? It represents subconscious. I wonder if the space of quiet, that nothingness, is there simply to allow us the space with which to accept and become aware of all that is other. So all our noise, all our drama, all our craziness is somehow in this photograph. And it's not that it's repelled or oppressed or suppressed, but that this photograph is allowing everything to come out, even though it's of nothing.
Yeah, this um it's a very strange imagery, but this is the kind of image that makes you feel like you can just sort of, it's gonna sound terrible, just like unbutton the top button of your pants and go, ah. Like it's this sort of you can like untie things, you know what I mean? Like it makes me feel like you always have your hair in braids and that kind of thing. This is the kind of thing, like I used to have long hair. This would be the feeling of taking the elastic out of my hair, you know. Um, there's like this relaxation, and I don't mean like, sitting on a beach relaxation. I mean relaxing as in taking something that has, you know, tension and releasing that tension. Um,
Well, there's also, I don't think, I hope it's not too weird that I mention this photograph is a photograph of death. Um, Death, dying for things. Again, having that space to understand the true nature and that it moves to nothing
I
is
think that I
profound.
think our two interpretations though are not in contrast. I think they're sort of coming at the same thing from different sides.
Yeah, yeah, they are the same, you
Yeah.
know. But I think a lot of people maybe, do people like this photograph? You like it, I like it, but is
Well,
it?
then two people like it. People like it.
Yeah, but I wonder. I'm quite interested again this idea of like gallery behaviors. Would people just walk past this because there's not enough going on? That's usually like there's like if there is ever to be a hazard in minimalism, that is it. Is it
Sure.
simply not enough going on?
Yeah, that it could be ignored if it's like it sort of getting lost in the shuffle kind of thing. I think that yes, I think that this would be far more successful if it was the only thing on the wall in any particular room. From the point of view of a person coming in cold,
Mm.
yeah, like it requires a moment or two of attention for you to say, you have to take a second and sort of shut down your brain for a minute to sort of let it get into you. I think this is one of those ones where the more you think about it, in order to appreciate it, what you need to do is let go, not tense up.
But would you say the same could be true of this?
No,
Mm.
not for me.
What about that?
Well, hold on a second. Go to the next one. I mean, you yourself have said that to understand it, you were going to sit there for 45 minutes reading and analyzing the connection. That is an active. I feel like
But
this
I don't
work.
need to do that, right? I do that because of a whole other heap of my own kind of crap that.
No, she's asking you to do that. There are footnotes to follow. This is a, Foster Wallace, you know this is deep kind of stuff. You know,
Is it?
I think that
Is
I
there?
think Ronnie's work, I think, is different than, I think the Derges one is closer to the Sugimoto than Ronnie's work in the middle. It's just different.
And yet, I think again, if we were to put these on the wall at the same time and to stand back and to look at them, yes, the commonality is water, but is there another thing that links them? I mean, we could play that game, couldn't we? Like, what's the thing that links the image? Well, we say
One of these things is not like the other.
but what's the other thing that links them? Is there I'm using the word death, always a happy word to use for people when you're talking about art. Um, no, but death isn't everything as far as I can.
Sure,
Um, isn't it? Death is in this. Death is in this.
sure.
Each moment is dying to the last. And the point of those footnotes actually is to make that even clearer that, I can no longer see the thing that is cited because it's lost in the past. It's gone.
I think that all three of these, I will say that the one thing that I think all of these have in common is this sort of, it's what I said about this first one a number in different ways, which is this idea of sort of the infiniteness of what's going on in them. I mean, in this case, it was, time and the drips and the interference patterns and the complexity of all of that. In the last one, it's long exposure of a foggy ocean so that all you really end up with is this gray gradient. And then it's sort of the infinite amount of moments in the other that Horn decides to mark and describe, but in between each of those points are an indeterminate amount of other places that she could have marked and described in a different way, or maybe even inviting you to mark and describe yourself. The problem that I have with that kind of thinking is that you can literally get lost in it like a maze and then you never get out. You know what I mean? Like there's no exit point.
Does that make the image quite claustrophobic?
Yes, to me, it feels like a trap.
Yeah. Whereas, is there a trap in this?
No,
No. Is there a
but
trap in this one?
well, not nearly as much
I
to
mean,
me.
I do want to say um, I've spoken about a piece of work by Anthony Gormley when I was talking to Philip Tunner and Alistair Heron when we were talking about beauty in one of my other dialogues. And I was describing going to see Gormley's work at the Hayward Gallery in London, and there being a glass cube in a room, huge glass cube filled with white mist, dense white mist. I think it's called I can't remember what it's called, but anyway, you were invited to enter that cube, and as soon as you went into the space, I have no idea how they did it. It was odorless. It wasn't like it wasn't like dry ice or something where you would find it filling your lungs.
Sure,
Just dense white fog in this glass box. And honestly, your hand would be like there and you wouldn't be able to see it. It was so thick.
sure,
People going into that room were freaking out.
sure.
They
Yeah.
were totally losing it. They found that very, very unsettling.
Have you ever been down deep in a cave and they turn the lights off and it's just there's zero light? Like your eyes do not get adjusted to it because there is no light to adjust to. It's just like you can literally, do what you're saying in darkness and there's just nothing there. It's very disconcerting. Our brains are not wired for that. So I'd imagine the opposite of that in just a whiteness around you would be equally, or maybe even more so, because there's this sense of I should be seeing something. My brain is
Yeah,
getting
this is
light.
light. Uh-huh. And when we look at this, are we registering light?
I
And
think if this photograph was reality and you were there, it would freak you out. The fact that it's contained in a 24-inch photograph or whatever
we're not freaking
probably
out
makes it
because
more
of a
digestible.
Herbert fog type thing, though, is it? It's something
Yeah.
other. It's not like it's not that kind of standard. There are monsters coming out of the fog.
No, but there's definitely this infiniteness to all of this kind of image, you know.
Do you find that scary then?
I don't like things that I can't measure. The fact that, like in this photograph, the distance could be 10 feet away or it could be 100 miles away.
Yeah.
That unsettles me. Consider me unsettled.
Yeah.
Um,
How do you think you
is there
got
what?
in that Anthony Gormley box, Bill?
I don't know how I do. Depends what kind of mindset I was in, whether I had a migraine at the time.
Mm. So I this is a just fly by the seat of my pants kind of moment to even include this at the end, because Bill knows this. I had quite a lot of technical problems earlier trying to embed the moving image that this actually is a still from. It's a still taken from a moving image installation by Bill Viola. And I want to finish on this because there's lots in this that, though it's very different in its format, is still very much, yes, discussing, describing, exploring notions of water, what water is and does, and how we operate and respond to it. But it's also very much, I think, about the symbolism of immersion, of being subsumed or taken in, of being drowned, of being resurrected. I'm going to put a link to another YouTube video uploaded by somebody else where you will be able to watch this as the actual moving version. But if it's okay to just describe it a little, what happens is the figure submerges very slowly in slow motion down into this depth, this watery gloom. And there's a resplendence to the way the light fractures, refracts out into the space, and then it reverses, and what has been a submersion becomes an emergence, and so on. It's also paired with water sounds, and that sound in a gallery setting is almost overwhelming. It's so loud. And I was saying to you, Bill, earlier that in a gallery setting, it's usually presented in a very, very large, dark room, and it's projected to a vast scale. So everything is overwhelming about it. Now, to me, it's profoundly moving and beautiful, and also unsettling.
Do you think that the audio that plays is the actual audio from the actual person smashing into the water, or do you think it's a like another whole other recording?
No, I think it probably is.
Because
The,
it's very rumbly and slow motion sounding, isn't it? The way it's
I mean, Viola is a master of manipulating us to feel things. To
okay. Here's my question in this case that goes right into that.
hmm.
Water in this sense, in the other senses that we've seen it, water was the subject, but other than sort of the infiniteness that we've talked about, it wasn't playing into the drowning, baptismal, washing. It didn't have a human element to it, which this does, and all of that cultural stuff that sits that is primed and ready. It's like putting a heap of sugar and some of this and some of that. It's like spices that we already know what they taste like on top of what he's making. It's half baked already. You know what I mean? In deciding to do something where you're immersing a human into water, that immediately, if I just say somebody's being immersed into water, that immediately conjures up all kinds of stuff that's sort of
But
cultural, right?
I mean, I know that sometimes I miss the mark with how I bring images together, but there wasn't an element of accident. There wasn't a thoughtlessness in how I've brought us from this to that.
No, I understand. Yeah,
And I
I'm just
don't,
saying that. Do you think that he that when an artist chooses a subject matter that has so many implied meanings before they even start, just because of the medium, as it were, in some ways. Is
But
is that interesting to you, or do you come to it with a blank slate still?
well, of course, I'm not coming with a blank slate. However, I'm coming at this today having been through a sequence of images where, this is my version. Any curator's uh, business is to manipulate an audience into seeing a train of thought.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and maybe this is too, maybe it's too obvious that it lacks sophistication to see that there is water, 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 water.
Mm-hmm.
But also we've gone from a kind of negation of human to communion with nature to there being an overlay of humanity or humanness, rather, not humanity, of personality, of experience. So suddenly the human experience is projected onto the surface of the water, but nonetheless, the water retains its actual quality. Then when we get to this, which in many ways we could be the kindest about, perhaps because this is the one that we love the most, this is further still into the projections of our own minds. And where we reach this point of understanding the um, the changeable nature of our own interpretations when we're given little to work with. We're given so much to work with here. We're actually given quite a lot to work with there. Each time we bring our own experience, each time we bring our own hang-ups and worries, again, our self-consciousness clouds everything that we are reading into these images. And then when we get here, and I mention the word death, and thinking about how then a space that is otherwise so nebulous becomes not personified, but certainly full of person, even if that person is going into nothing, into an oblivion. Nonetheless, I'm starting from here where I'm the observer. And I, as the observer, I'm very human to this, which is the human experience of actually experiencing through that channel of water, how I then become the experience. So to me, the slate is not clean to arrive at this image. And I would have to say that without knowing a lot about Bill Viola, if I knew nothing about this work at all, through our discussion, I would very much understand how I would feel by this point in looking at these images.
Yeah, I look at the Bill Viola piece, and it is by far of the four the most manipulative of the four. It. I feel like he has a very specific direction he's trying to push your brain, and I don't know that that's necessarily true of the others.
I do wonder with Sugimoto, the Zen master who gives who gives his pupil nothing, in fact, is teaching him everything.
Well, yes, of course, but I mean, I guess Viola's being literal about what he's trying to do. You know,
Mm, yeah.
which doesn't mean that it's not successful or important or anything else. But I think that it's interesting to me that in contrast with the others that we've looked at today, I find this one I react the most contrarian to this one.
Okay.
And that could be the way that we've set it up or the way we've discussed it. It could be the mood I'm in today. It could be the fact that the man's name is Bill. I don't know. But do you ever have that? Do you ever have that where you look at a work of art that is good or well done, and at the same time you're like, no, you're not going to get me today, not today, copper. You never had that feeling?
No, I don't.
Maybe it's just me. It's interesting. I'm gonna have to watch the video on a nice screen.
Yeah, use it on your big projector.
On a projector, yeah.
Yeah,
How do you know I have a projector?
you showed me.
Oh, okay.
For the record, it was The Empire Strikes Back, Bill.
Oh, right, The Empire Strikes Back.
Anyway, Bill Wadman. I think that possibly quite fitting for our subject. We have only dipped a toe. We have yet,
I see what you did there.
we have not really gone below the surface as much as we could. And often at the
Yeah.
end of our conversations, I feel that we're actually only just starting, really, with what we need to say. It's like this is the introduction to the talk about water, what we've just done.
Mhm.
But there's infinite scope for more.
This is the first lecture in a series.
Anyway, Bill Wadman, as usual, thank you very much.
Thank you. This was fun.
See you soon.